Welcome to part two. In this edition, we're going to complete the city as well as add shading. First thing we can do is establish a street that our city buildings are resting on. So the way I'll do this is take my first initial line, which is essentially the corner of that city block, take the bottom of it, line the bottom of it with the left vanishing point, and line the bottom of it with the right vanishing point and create those lines. This step is optional if it's something you would like to do. Next, we are going to add buildings alongside the buildings we've already created. Pretty much follow the exact same rules we've established in part one of the drawing demo, but where you start from is right alongside a pre-existing building. So choose the left or right side of that building and just create that first initial line as an extension of that side of the building, and then follow the exact same steps as we've established before. Now we're going to be creating an alley or a little gap in between two buildings. The way I'll do this is instead of lining up the building I'm going to draw right alongside of a pre-existing building, I leave a little bit of gap or a little bit of space in between the new building and the building that's already there. So I'll just take my initial line, I'll move it a little bit left or a little bit right of the building that's already been established, and then I'll follow the exact same steps. The only new step would be the very end where I line up the initial line of the new building we're putting in with the right vanishing point, which you'll see here in a second. And this kind of just establishes that wall of the building as well as that space in between. Next, we're going to create columns, which are a series of shapes stacked on top of each other. Students always ask me how to do this, and it has some technical difficulties, but it's actually pretty simple if you keep in mind the fact that the left line, the right line, and the middle line, or the initial line of all of these shapes are in the exact same spot. So something that I do, as you can just see, is I'll go ahead and establish the left side and the right side before I add the rest of the shapes in. And then the left side or the right side of the shape has already been established, and I can kind of build my shapes off of that. And of course, all of the shapes follow the exact same guidelines as the shapes that we've created already. And I always draw them in lightly, and then to show the foreground and the background. Once I get all the shapes established and drawn in, then I'll go back in and erase all of the lines that I don't need. Now we're going to add in our additional shapes to complete our surrealist cityscape. For this particular assignment, you want to have at least 10 total shapes. You want to make sure that one of your shapes is completely above the horizon line, one of your shapes is completely below the horizon line, and that you have at least one shape that goes above and below the horizon line. If you fulfilled those requirements, the 7 or more shapes that you add in can be placed wherever you would like them to be placed. As you're completing this portion of the project, you also want to keep in mind that you want to make sure that you establish the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. So as you're adding your shapes in, you also want to go back in and start erasing the lines that you do not need. Now we're going to create the illusion that you can see into one of the buildings. Do this by lining up the left front corner to the right vanishing point and connecting, which works for this shape because the opening is on the left side. Then we'll do the back right corner to the left vanishing point and connecting. Then we will kind of find the back corner that we would see and draw a straight line from that corner all the way down and then erase what we don't need. Now we're going to add shading to create the illusion of a light source. Before we get started, this is a simple, basic introduction into shading. There will be some simple things that we do not go over, something as simple as cast shadows. We're not super concerned about that with this particular project, just looking to get some basic shading down to create some simple three-dimensional effects into your cityscape. This is an example of a finished product. In order to get there, we're first going to need some source of light. There it is. Hey, little fella. There's our light source up on the top left-hand corner, which is providing light, which is shining on our surrealist cityscapes. You'll notice that the sunshine with little sunglasses in the top left-hand corner. So, because it's up in the tops of our building are going to be the brightest. So they're going to get the lightest tone. In this case, you can see it as a bright white. Along with that, the bottom sides are going to be the darkest, which you can see that because those sides are not catching any light. The sun is also slightly to the left, which means the left side of our buildings are going to be a little bit brighter than our right side. So the left side is a light middle tone. And the right side is getting more light than the bottom, so it's a little bit brighter than the bottom, but not as much light as the left side, so it's not quite as bright as the left side. So in that case, the right sides of the buildings are going to be a dark middle tone. Now we will be shading the building that we can see inside of. The light, of course, is coming from the top, so that means the top of this particular building or this particular shape is going to be the brightest. So that particular side is a solid white tone. The back wall of this interior space is not catching any light, so we're going to make this our darkest value, so it's straight black. The bottom of this interior space is going to be catching some light, not as much as the top, but some light, so it's going to be our light middle tone. The wall on the right side, just like the other walls on the right side, is not catching a lot of light, so it's going to be a middle dark tone. The interior wall, the wall that we can see due to its placement, it's also not catching a lot of light, so it also is going to be a dark middle tone. So there you have it. There's our completed surrealist cityscape with 10 shapes, with at least one shape that goes above and below the horizon line, at least one shape that's completely above the horizon line, and at least one shape that's completely below the horizon line. It is shaded to completion, and this is a pretty solid work of art. But if you want to get crazy with the Cheez Whiz, you can always add more to it. Add a little bit of a background, add some designs, add more color. Do whatever you would like to it to make it 100% your own and have a little bit of fun with it.